Welcome to Enjoy English. I'm Alice.
I'm Anthony.
And today, our lesson on the origins, our unit is on why can't bakers count? So we're exploring the origins of the term baker's dozen, which is kind of a term you hear a lot, but usually, like when you think of a dozen, it's a little different than a baker's dozen. So we're going to talk about that today.
没错，今天我们要介绍的追根究底的单元呢，就是 the origins。origin 的话就是指来源、起源嘛。然后我们看到我们的标题上面写说 ，Why can't bakers count？ 到底为什么这些面包师傅是不会算数吗？为什么每次都数错呢？我们今天要讲的主题跟我们这个 subtitle 这边有点关系啊。他说 ，Exploring the origins of the term baker's dozen， 什么叫做面包师傅的一打呢？平常我们提到一打的话是12，到底面包师傅的一打到底是多少呢？我们赶快来看看今天内容吧。
Let's do it.
Why can't bakers count? When you go into a store and buy a dozen eggs, you go home with 12. When you are in a restaurant and order a dozen chicken wings, the waiter returns with 12 of them on a plate. So, why are there 13 items given out when people go to bakeries and order a baker's dozen? Bakers can't be that bad at counting, can they? The most widely accepted theory is that bakers had a bad reputation for cheating people in medieval times in England. When people went to the bakery to get loaves of bread, sometimes they would be normal, but other times the bread was small. The problem was so common that laws were made that if bakers were found cheating their customers, they would get fined or whipped. At the time, bakers didn't have scales to weigh the dough. So bread and other baked products sometimes looked bigger or smaller due to baking and air content. To make sure they didn't break the law, bakers would throw in an extra loaf. This would come to be known as a baker's dozen. So, the next time you order a dozen baked products at your local bakery, count them for yourself and see if you got a baker's dozen.
Okay, let's start paragraph 1. So we have, when you go into a store and buy a dozen eggs, you go home with 12. And that's true. Usually a dozen means 12. So the egg carton has 6 by 2, so it's 12.
没错，老师刚刚提到 egg carton。carton 的意思就是那个我们装蛋的那种蛋的盒子，对不对？它是6乘2嘛，所以这样一共是12个。所以你每次到超市去买蛋的时候，然后他就讲说 ，When you go into a store。and buy a dozen eggs， 好，你只要买一打蛋的时候 ，you go home with 12， 你通常拿回去是12颗蛋。
When you are in a restaurant and order a dozen chicken wings, the waiter returns with 12 of them on a plate. And that also, again, is a dozen chicken wings, so 12. So that makes sense. And I think it seems like a lot, but I think that's not too much because it's just the wings, right? They're pretty small.
没错。所以这边的话，看第二句话，他说 ，When you are in a restaurant， 然后你在餐厅里面呢 ，and order a dozen chicken wings， 如果你点了一打的鸡翅，通常呢 ，the waiter returns with 12 of them， 好，他们会带了12个鸡翅来 on a plate， 放在你那个餐盘上面，所以也是12个。
So why are there 13 items given out when people go to bakeries and order a baker's dozen? So a bakery, just for clarification, is a place you've probably been to, right? Has lots of bread or cakes or anything that's baked, right? Like, so not cooked like on the stove, but baked in the oven.
没错，就是放在这个烤炉里面去烤的这种面包类的、烘焙类的这种东西，这个我们在面包店里面都会买得到。所以这边所讲的 bakery 或者 bakeries， 它的复数形态都是指面包店的意思。他说 ，So why are there 13 items given out when people go to bakeries？ 为什么呢？你到了面包店之后， 你每次要点到 and order a baker's dozen， 你点的这个面包师傅的一打的时候，你会拿到13个嘞。
It is weird, right? Bakers can't be that bad at counting, can they? And I don't know any bakers personally, but I do know a lot of people tell me they're bad at math. So maybe bakers just aren't good at math?
或者是呢，或者是搞不好你跟这个 baker 的关系特别好，他多送你一个也说不定。但是他就告诉你说了。Bakers can't be that bad at counting. 他们应该算术不会差到这种程度吧 ？Can they 会吗？这种感觉。所以这个 can they 的话讲说会这样子吗？这种感觉哦。
And it's strange because when we said a dozen earlier, again, in most situations, you really only get 12 of whatever it is, right? Whether it's chicken wings or eggs or anything else. So it is strange that when you say the phrase baker's dozen, that doesn't mean 12, it means 13. So if you say the phrase, again, dozen by itself is different than baker's dozen.
没错，所以在使用这个 dozen 这个时候，你光讲 a dozen 的话，意思就是12个。但是如果你特别强调 a baker's dozen 的话，大家就知道哦 ，you're not talking about 12, you're talking about 13， 好是13个的感觉。
But don't worry because I think a dozen, usually we only really use it when it comes to eggs, or maybe at a restaurant you can get like a dozen chicken wings, but it's very rare. Like we don't really buy things in 12, right?
不太会吼。
对。So yeah, but we can find out in the next paragraph why it's called that.
Yeah.
All right, let's start with paragraph 2 now. So the most widely accepted theory is that bakers had a bad reputation for cheating people in medieval times in England. So a theory is like kind of an idea we have, right? We usually test theories, like scientists come up with a theory about the Big Bang or whatever, right? And they try to find evidence or try to test it in some way. The Big Bang's a little hard to test, but you know what I mean.
没错，在这边的话，老师刚刚提到一个 The Big Bang Theory， 就是那种宇宙刚开始的时候那种大霹雳的这个理论嘛，哈。所以在第一句话里面，我们看到这个字 The most widely accepted theory， 所以 theory 就是理论的意思。通常老师刚刚有提到另外一个字test a theory， 就是去测试这项理论。他说了 the most widely accepted theory， 大部分人大家都会愿意接受的这个理论。你可以想象哦，这个理论是被接受的，所以我们会用 widely accepted， 用被动的方式去表达这个概念。好，大家能接受的理论是什么呢？ Is that bakers had a bad reputation for cheating people in medieval times in England。 好，就告诉你说，原来当初呢是在中世纪的时候，英国这个地方，英格兰这个地方呢，这些面包师傅好像有一个比较不好的名声，a bad reputation, a bad name。好 ，reputation 就是名誉、名声，然后后面接上 for， 会做什么事呢 ？For cheating people， 有时候会偷斤减两，会去欺骗他的顾客。
Next we have.When people went to the bakery to get loaves of bread, sometimes they would be normal, but other times the bread was small. So notice that we say loaves of bread. We don't say like one bread or two bread, right? We have to say like one loaf of bread or two loaves of bread. So keep that in mind when you're talking about bread.
没错，其实像面包的话，其实它本身是一个不可数的那种 uncountable noun， 好，不可数的这种名词哦。所以我们再去数它的时候 ，a loaf of bread, two loaves of bread， 好，通常会用这个 loaf 来当做它的量词。而且还有一个很重要的地方哦，比方很多时候我们会想说我要去买吐司，吐司的话英文不是 toast， 是 bread。因为很多时候白吐司的话是面包，但如果说你用 toast 这个字，一定是烤过的面包才会用 toast 这个字，千万不要因为它中文是吐司，就直接把它翻成 toast， 那个东西不是对等的，可能要特别注意一下。所以你看这边这句话，他说了 ，When people went to the bakery to get loaves of bread， 好，每次呢只要有人到了，好，以前在中古世纪的时候，他们到了这个面包店里面要去买一些面包 ，sometimes they would be normal。But other times the bread was small. 这个 sometimes they 指的是 loaves of bread， 它这些面包有的时候看起来是蛮正常的。But other times， 但有其他时候怎么样呢 ？The bread was small， 看起来怎么比昨天的小，可恶那种感觉。
The problem was so common that laws were made that if bakers were found cheating their customers, they would get fined or whipped. So whipped is basically like they use a whip and whip people, right? Back then that was more common. Now I don't think people do that anymore, hopefully.
No, hopefully.
Yeah. Please not. But yes, whipping back then was more common as a punishment.
Yeah, 所以在这边的话，老师先解释了 whip 这个字。好，如果说今天 whip 当名词使用的时候 ，whip 指的是鞭子。那如果说今天 if you whip somebody 就是用鞭子鞭打他们。那如果说今天你看这句话，他说 the problem was so common， 好，这种情况非常的普遍 ，that laws were made。好，就到什么程度呢？甚至还有立法，当时还有立法怎么样 ？That if bakers were found cheating their customers， 一旦只要发现你面包师傅如果敢欺骗你顾客的话呢 ，they would get fined or whipped。好，所以他说会得到什么样的 punishment？ 刚刚 Alice 老师还介绍了另外一个字 punishment， 这个字的拼法是 punish。Punish 本身就是刑罚的动词嘛，加上 ment 就变成名词 punishment 惩罚。他们会怎么样被惩罚呢 ？They would get fined。好，他们这个 fine 加上 d 的话，其实是被罚款的意思，不是说that they will be fine 。不是那个 that's different 他没事的，没事的，不是这个 fined 是加上。就是给罚款的意思，要么就是被罚款，甚至呢 were whipped 还要被鞭打，好，有可能是轻则罚款，重则鞭打，哇，好恐怖。
Yeah, really. Like if you had to choose one or the other, I think most of us would choose to be fined.
I'll get fined.
Yeah,
definitely.
Like, I don't really want to be whipped, right? So yeah, but it's kind of interesting that, right? They actually, since the problem was so common, it was so widespread, like that they had to do something about it, right? They actually made a law about bakers cheating their customers. I think that's really interesting.
没错，所以老师刚刚还提到另外一个很棒的字叫做 widespread. When you say something that is widespread， 就是非常非常普遍。在这边的话，我们不是提到 common 这个字吗 ？widespread 这个字，这个形容词也可以学起来。我帮你拼一下 widespread。widespread 就是很普遍，到处都看得到的。
So let's take a break and then move on to the third paragraph. All right, let's start paragraph 3. So we have, at the time, bakers didn't have scales to weigh the dough. So bread and other baked products sometimes looked bigger or smaller due to baking and air content. So that's a pretty big sentence. Let's go back to when they said they didn't have scales to weigh the dough. So a scale is something that we use to like weigh things, how heavy something is. So even in your bathroom, you might have a scale, right, to step on and weigh yourself, right?
No.
Oh, what's wrong?
I don't want to face the truth.
Oh, no. Well, we can have scales to weigh ourselves, but also weigh food. A lot of people, when they're cooking or just, meal prepping, planning their meals, they use a scale to weigh their food. So here, they use the scales to weigh the dough.
Yeah, 所以在这边的话，我们来看一下这句话咯。他说 at the time 就是指当时的这个英格兰，然后是中古世纪的时候 bakers didn't have scales to weigh the dough. 好，这边的话特别注意一下，老师刚刚特别花了很多时间去介绍什么是 scales， 就是指这种秤。然后刚刚甚至还提到说，在这个浴室里面，我们有时候会有放上磅秤。然后我刚刚就露出崩溃的表情，说我不想面对真相这样的感觉，对不对？好，那个秤呢，可以除了来量体重之外，你也可以拿来量食物到底有多重。但是他们当时的话是没有任何的秤去量量说，这个面团好 to weigh the dough， 这个 dough 就是面团的意思。这个面团到底有没有足够的重量？好，他们当时没有秤的话，只能大概目测一下，看一下这种状况。这边还注意另外一个字，就是 weigh。weigh 这个字的话，这边当动词使用的意思就是指去称重的意思。如果说今天你提到是体重的话，这个 weigh 后面要再加上一个 t， 变成 weight， 就是变成体重，也就是变成名词的形态。好，在这边的话可以不妨注意一下咯。
So also something I want to mention is that the dough, right? Dough, again, would be the uncooked bread, I guess. Like before you put it in the oven, it's dough. But you can also use dough with other things, not just bread. We can use it with cookies, like cookie dough, so delicious. And cake dough, right? Cake, maybe we'd say batter more often. But just keep that in mind, like dough is going to be uncooked bread or cookies or things like that.
没错，所以 dough 这个字的话，其实它除了跟这个面包还没有烘焙过的面包是面团之外，有的时候常常也会跟饼干，好，比方说今天饼干还没放进去烘焙的时候，你也可以用 cookie dough 来表达这个状态。然后它后面还有提到 and so bread and other baked products sometimes look bigger or smaller. 所以因为今天没有这个秤去确认它的这个分量有没有足够，所以在这边的话，其实有时候它的东西就烤完之后会有的大啊，有的小。Due to baking， 好，可能是因为了这种烘焙的过程 and air content， 好，看它空气的含量等等，都会影响它最后面包的大或小。
Yeah, if it has a lot of air inside the dough, right, it might look really big, but it doesn't weigh very much because air is not very heavy, right?
没错，没错。
So they were probably upset if you had a big loaf of bread, but then it weighed nothing because you eat it and it's mostly air, right?
Yeah， 就是空气，觉得吃起来好像没有饱足感，怎么都里面都是充满了空气。
So the next part is to make sure they didn't break the law.Bakers would throw in an extra loaf. So if you break the law, right, you're not literally breaking it, but you are, I guess, in a way, breaking it metaphorically, right? It means that there's the law and you are not following it. You are doing something against the rules or against the law.
没错，在这边的话 break the law 的意思就是违法的意思啊。那老师刚刚有提到另外一个字 metaphorically 就是有点像是譬喻一样的说法，好，它就是有点像抽象的概念，而不是真的把什么东西弄断，对不对？所以这边的话，他提到 to make sure they didn't break the law。为了确保他们当时的这个法令都在那边嘛，如果给的不够就被打，就被罚款，对不对？他希望不要去违法，于是呢，他就说 bakers would throw in an extra loaf， 他们就会多送个面包哈，保证自己屁股不会挨鞭子，保证自己不会被罚款哦。这个 throw in 的意思是额外奉送另外一个面包来保护他们自己的屁股。
And throw in is a very common phrase we use, I think. Like often we'll just say I'll just throw in like an extra $1 or something, or I'll throw in an extra when you get something from the grocery store, maybe they'll say, yeah, I'll throw in an extra whatever. I don't know. I guess I'm trying to think of anything besides bread, cookie or something. Right?
再奉送一个东西给你。
Right. So it's very common to say like throw in. So keep that in mind.
没错，有的时候你上菜市场的时候，你买了很多东西，好像说我买了好多萝卜啊、青菜啊，可能老板送你2根葱，对不对？还是可以搭配的使用的这种免费奉送的，我们就可以用 throw in 来表达。
And again, notice the loaf, right? Like we'd say an extra loaf, right? Not like an extra bread, right? So we'd say a loaf of bread.And then multiple is loaves with the V instead of an F. So keep that in mind.
没错，要注意它的复数形态是去掉 F 加上 VES.
All right. This would come to be known as a baker's dozen. So now we know, right? Because it's 12 plus 1 equals 13. So that's why the baker's dozen, specifically bakers, because...They were afraid of getting in trouble, so that's why they have 13 instead of 12.
没错，最后就告诉你了 ，This would come to be known as a baker's dozen， 意思就是这呢就是我们所谓的面包师傅的一打变成13个这样的由来哦。
So let's take a break and move on to the next paragraph. Okay, our final paragraph.So, the next time you order a dozen baked products at your local bakery, count them for yourself and see if you got a baker's dozen. So again, right, if we order a dozen, is it a baker's dozen or a regular dozen, right?
没错，所以下次的话，不妨你去那个面包店买面包的时候，碰碰运气。好，他就说 ，So the next time you order a dozen baked products at your local bakery.好，如果你到这个家附近的面包店，你买了面包，说，哎，老板，我要一打面包哦。 count them for yourself. 你不妨可以自己数数看 and see if you got a baker's dozen. 他会不会多送你一个？我才是不会。
No, yeah, I was about to say, I think usually, I don't know, I've never ordered a baker's dozen before, have you?
没有吃那么多。
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't think I could have that many. I'd have to, because things from the bakery are usually fresh and they go bad fairly quickly, right?
Right.
So we can't keep it that long. So we'd have to share it, I guess, with everybody. But I don't think I could eat. I like bread, but not 13 loaves of bread. So let's take a break and then talk about vocabulary. Okay, time for our vocabulary words. So our first word is origin, which is where something comes from. It's origin.
Origin, 我们第一个单字就是来源或是起源的意思。
And keep in mind that there's a lot of variations of this form, like where something originates from or something is original. It all comes from origin.
没错，这个字它可以衍生很多的词类变化，比如说变成动词的时候，你们后面加上 ate 就变成 originate。好，就是起源的意思。那或者是今天加上 al 变成一个形容词 original， 就是原本的。所以这个动词变化，词类变化的话，特别注意一下哦。
Next word we have is bakery, which is where we get bread and other delicious baked goods.
没错，就是我们去买那些面包、美味面包的地方，面包店。
Next we have is loaf. This is the singular one, a loaf of bread.
没错，这是用来量面包的量词哦。一条面包、两条面包的条就用 loaf 这个字。
Then we have whip, which we talked about earlier, right? Like when you whip people, well, hopefully not people. Or sometimes I guess the only time I could think of that people might do now is maybe horses, even though that's still really cruel. But yeah, it's the only thing I can think of.
没错，所以老师刚刚提到说，其实现在能想到用鞭子的，可能是那种马在跑的时候，你鞭打它，虽然这样听起来很 cruel， 就是很残忍的意思。cruel, cruel 就是很残忍。
Next we have is scale. We use a scale to measure the weight of something at the airport. When you go on the plane, you might measure your luggage using a scale.
这边的话就是磅秤的意思。
And then we have weigh, which is related to scale, right? It's like how heavy something is. You weigh it.
没错，就是称重量，这边当动词使用。
Next we have break the law, which if you do something against the law, you're breaking the law. You break the law.
违法的意思。
And finally, we have throw in, right? So you throw in something extra at the end.
没错，就是免费奉送的意思哦。
So that's all the time we have today. Let's see you next time.
Bye-bye.